I don't want anything too touchy-feely, she said. Our people aren't really like that. These were the words spoken to me from the other end of the phone. It was May of 2012, and I was full steam ahead into my speaking career. I would change lives. I was going to be the next Tony Robbins. Maybe Oprah would talk to me when I got my name out there. I had arrived. My whole attitude was, just hire me, you won't regret it. I know how to make people feel good. And then I actually heard her, wait, did she say too touchy-feely? I paused, hesitated, maybe even stammered a little. I should say something. I spent the next few minutes trying to convince her that I was not, in fact, too touchy-feely, and that I could deliver something very businesslike and devoid of emotion. I pictured these men and women in suits wearing dignified glasses, taking notes with stern faces. I said, yeah, I can speak to them. I would just change everything. I'd have to take out the stories and the fun. Yeah, about that. So I began to rewrite my keynote. I started to second guess what I had just done. She hired me a day later in an email. See, changing my work would be in essence changing who I am. And I realized that after so much time spent trying to live as authentically as I possibly could, I realized creating something that wasn't me would be missing the mark. I would be abandoning the very fabric of the work I was doing. Time and time again, I was told that my greatest gift was in connecting with my audience. That conversation stuck with me for a long time, and in some ways, I think it became the catalyst for the work I began to do in the field of leadership. I wanted to study it. If it was out there, I wanted to learn it and know it. I went back through my master's program and started to uncover all the work I did in the field of leadership and how it transcends through an organization and a team. I dug through research, countless hours of articles. I talked with people. I asked hard questions, and I read a lot. And I finished a certification program in sustainable business strategy from the Harvard Business School, where I started to see and we talked about the fact that people are a company's greatest asset. So I decided to focus my work here on people, on not just the company's greatest asset, but the greatest asset we will ever have as a global society. The connection of people is what will save us from falling into the great abyss of loneliness, disconnect, and the utter demise of happiness, care, and compassion for one another. Our humanity is the very thing that will provide us hope for a better and more connected tomorrow. We as a society are craving connection. Loneliness is no longer being laughed at as a research topic. In fact, it is considered an epidemic today by psychologists around the globe. The only thing that is going to save us from this is more conversation around compassion and belonging. Right now, it is being seen as more of a risk factor to your health than obesity. It is also the equivalent of smoking 15 cigarettes a day. And it's found in the same part of the brain where we actually feel physical pain. And being married doesn't save you from being lonely either. Over half of all of those asked who reported chronic loneliness, you guessed it, were married. The most likely age group right now that feels lonely and reports feeling lonely, 16 to 24-year-olds. And that number is currently on the rise. Every year I speak at the Pennsylvania Free Enterprise Week, and every time when I'm finished, there's always a line of kids that come up to say hello or to say thank you for being there. 2 years ago, I met Annie. She was the last one in line, and she was going into her senior year of high school. Her head down as she waited to talk to me. It was finally her turn, and she was still staring at her laces, tears brushing the tops of her torn blue Converse sneakers. We finally made eye contact, and she spoke softly and deliberately. "I just wanted to say thank you," she said. "This may be the very first time in my entire life that I have ever felt seen." That day, I shared a concept, sawubona. Sawubona is a Zulu greeting, which means, "I see you." And the answer, sakona, means, "Because you see me, therefore I am." Because you see me, I exist. Every human being wants two things in life. We want to be seen, and we want to be listened to, because that validates our very human existence. When I drove home that day after meeting Annie, I realized how critical this conversation really is. We are the most technologically connected society ever, yet we stand in the midst of being the most disconnected at the same time. And it's not just happening at home or in schools. Gallup's 2017 State of the Global Workplace tells us that 15% of employees feel engaged and therefore connected at work. That means that at any given time, 85% of the workforce feels completely disengaged and is just trying to get through the day with little to no emotional attachment at all. 2 of my colleagues and I started to study this, and we wanted to uncover this and really understand it. So we figured we'd try to get some real-time stats. I went to my personal Facebook page and I typed this: taking a poll. What factors lead to you being more engaged at your job? Now, this was a Friday afternoon at 2:30. Within 1/2 hour, we had 74 comments on a Friday afternoon at 2:30. Are you picking up what I'm putting down? Most of my friends were at work. The most astonishing part of all of this is that of those 74 comments, not one had anything to do with money. They all said things like, "I want to feel seen and heard, like my voice matters. I want to make a difference. And I just want to belong." It is not hard to see that we are living in a world of disconnect, from our boardrooms to our classrooms, from our locker rooms to our dining rooms. This has got to be the most important intention as we set out to change that conversation. Not just to bridge the disconnect in those places, but to rewrite the story of the disconnect in our very own everyday lives. This is where it begins. Right here, with you, with me, and it begins now. So how do we do this? I think in order to move forward with this, we have to cultivate the very things we are lacking: community, connection, and compassion. There are countless stories out there about how communities are built over time and how they stand the test of time. Susan Pinker writes about it in her book, The Village Effect. She talks about how we absolutely can change this. That if we practiced more human intimacy, face-to-face communication, this will change. My mom used to say these 3 words to me all the time: Jennifer, pay attention. Now, I know that most often than not, she was referring to my clumsiness as a tall, lanky kid who lacked body control everywhere with the softball field. But I believe they had deeper meaning even then. I think what she was doing was inviting me to become aware of my surroundings, to see the stranger that I share the elevator with, and the one that I pass going in the opposite direction in the crosswalk. I think those 3 simple words helped me to realize that building community is one of the most important things I do every day. But yet we can't just have this superficial connection. We can't only live on social media. I think part of the disconnect is because we allow people to only see what we want them to see through a computer screen. Instead, let's have more conversation about who and why instead of only just talking about where and what. Let's ask more questions of each other. Really get to know why your employee shows up and why for you and not some other company. Get to know who your son is by asking who inspires him and why your best friend liked the last book she read. This is real authenticity, and it will continue to foster connection every time we allow it to happen. I did a talk at the local library in 2014. It was shortly after my book was published. It was there that I met Julie. Julie was 92 years old, and she was working as the greeter at the front desk. We struck up a conversation, and we talked and talked and talked, and I found out that she actually lived in the same development as me. I left that night with her phone number, her address, and an invitation for a glass of wine. Julie and I shared red wine and Fritos on many occasions. I learned all about her. I actually realized that she was one of the very first women to hold the position she did in the US Marine Corps. Julie also wrote poetry, but not just any poem. Julie mastered the art of the limerick. One of her prized possessions was a letter from Michelle Obama after she sent a limerick for the First Lady's birthday. It was framed and it hung on the wall next to the front door by one of her in her uniform. One of the last times I got to see Julie before I moved, she wrote me my own limerick, and she gave it to me to keep. And it began with the words, "There once was a gal named Jen who wrote of her life with a pen." I have never forgotten Julie and those hours and hours of conversation and laughter. We created a lasting connection from one simple moment. My life is forever richer from the decision we both made to engage in a hello in the lobby of the Chester County Library. And lastly, let's practice compassion. And let's lead from there. Compassion is empathy in action. It's how we show up as human beings, not just number crunchers and robots. In the 10 plus years I have been across the country speaking for a living, I have yet to find those men and those women in those suits wearing those dignified glasses taking notes with stern faces. You know, the ones completely devoid of emotion. I like to think that if we wanted robots, we would have hired robots. Practicing compassion is like playing manhunt when I was a kid in my neighborhood. We used to play when the street lamps were coming on and it was getting dark. Manhunt was like hide and seek, but in reverse. So one or a small group of us would hide, and the rest of us would go out and try to find us one by one. The game ended when everyone was either safely found or you made it back to home base without being tagged. You could actually play, and we did this sometimes, where if you found someone on the hiding team, you could actually climb in and hide with them. Compassion is like climbing quietly into that hiding spot and not needing to say a word, but letting them know you're there, and you will sit there with them for as long as it takes to be found. If each of us practiced that kind of compassion, if we understood that this idea of belonging is about how we show up, if we understood that all of the pieces that we put together become our legacy, we will never lose sight of influencing a society that no longer craves connection, but cultivates a sense of belonging everywhere we show up. This, right here, is the intersection at which compassion meets humanity, where we live and breathe with emotion, even in the workplace, and we aren't afraid to be authentic in our leadership and heart-centered in our influence. Warning: people are touchy-feely. And to ignore that fact is to miss the greatest asset we will ever have at our disposal. Welcome to a new conversation on leadership. The one we need to be having, not just to save our workplaces and our families, but to save our humanity at the very core. Thank you.